Hello everyone and welcome to game 3 of the match, Magnus Carlsen versus Praggnanandhaa. If you've seen in game 1, it was a pretty tight game, but in the end Magnus was able to outplay Pragu in the Queen's Endgame, being a pawn up. It took him quite a few moves, but in the end he was able to win. Then in game 2, Pragu was doing okay. At some point Magnus was able to win the game with the black pieces, which means that now Magnus is leading 2-0 and Pragu needs to win at least this game to force game 4 and win that one to force tiebreaks. If he doesn't, if Magnus gets a draw in this one or a win, then the match is over. So it's quite an enjoyable game. Let's see what happened here. Magnus has the white pieces and he opens with knight to f3. He goes for the Reti opening. We have d5 by Pragu. We have e3, knight to f6, c4 now, and e6. We have knight to c3 and c5, inviting white to go for basically d4, which transposes into the Tarrasch defense, the three knights of the Tarrasch, and Magnus accepts this. So d4, we are in the three knights of the Tarrasch, knight to c6, and now c captures on d5. E captures and bishop to b5. So this is all very standard stuff. C captures on d4, knight captures, now threatening to win some material here. So Pragu defends with bishop to d7. We have castles, and now bishop to d6. Magnus goes back, knight to f3, now putting pressure on the d5 pawn, and you no longer have to worry about the c6 square, so bishop to e6. Now we shift attention to the d5 pawn. b3, Magnus preparing to flank out to the dark square bishop to this long diagonal. Pragu castles and bishop to g2. And now the position has been reached before. a6 is a known move, rook to c8 is a known move, queen to e7 is a known move. There are like maybe 10 games altogether that have reached this position, but the move Pragu plays is a new one. He plays bishop to g4, and it is now as of move 12 that we have a completely new game. So it's an annoying pin. You can't really move the knight, you can't move the queen, otherwise we're gonna mess up your pawn structure in front of the king. So Magnus first tries with h3. He wants to check if Pragu will go back or he will go to h5. He goes to h5, and now Magnus just brings the bishop back. So now the knight on f3 can move. We have rook to c8. Pragu continues development, and now knight to h4. Magnus offers a trade of light square bishops, and he wants to win the f5 square all to his knight. So bishop to g6, not allowing this beautiful f5 square to be captured by the knight, and Magnus now grabs the bishop pair. So knight captures on g6, h captures, and knight to b5, putting pressure on the bishop here, bishop to b8, and now bishop to f3. Now it's also bishop to g4 can be played. You attack the rook here. It's a very annoying move. Maybe Pragu trades, knight captures, bishop captures, but Magnus would have to give up the bishop pair. So, and also he's leading the match by a margin of 2 points. So bishop to f3 is a very nice solid move. He basically says, okay, if you want anything, you're the one who's going to have to force it. So we have a6, knight to d4, and now rook to e8. Magnus continues trading, knight captures on c6, b captures. This improves the sort of the stability of the d5 pawn, but the c6 pawn will remain weak. So here queen d3, developing the queen. Magnus connects the rooks, and now also as the a6 pawn is attacked, a5. We have rook a to c1. Now we're going to put pressure on this c6 pawn, and here we have knight to e4. You can't really play c5, even though it looks like a good idea, because we're just going to remove the defender of the d5 pawn and then pick it up. So that would be a terrible mistake. So after knight to e4, and this is a great square for the knight, Magnus just trades now bishop for knight. So bishop captures on e4, rook captures on e4, and now rook to c2. Magnus says, all right, I'm just gonna double up on the c file and go after your c6 pawn. Later on I can play queen to a6 and put even more pressure on the pawn. And here, if Pragu wanted to keep it clean, if he wanted to play a nice safe game, or if he wasn't losing the match by a 2-point margin, he would probably play queen to d6, adds a defender to the c6 pawn. Also, you are threatening checkmate, and after something like g3, even a4 looks like a very sneaky idea, trying to create a sort of a weakness on the queen side. But after rook to c2, Pragu played rook to h4. So the idea is that Pragu wants to play queen to d6, threaten checkmate, and if Magnus plays g3, he wants to capture the pawn on h3. And now Magnus says, all right, rook f to c1. He puts more pressure on the pawn, and now Pragu plays a queen to d6. The pawn is nicely defended, and he's threatening to bring the queen over to the h2 pawn, to the h2 square. And Magnus, well, he kind of if you've watched the live stream, he was kind of laughing at the position, or maybe he was just enjoying himself, and he played king to f1. He does not mind the queen coming to h2, and it seems like a reasonable idea. But the funny thing about this position is that the move rook h4, which Prague played to prevent g3, doesn't prevent g3 whatsoever. But this is one of the toughest moves to spot in this game. So here g3 is actually the strongest move. I'm just gonna show it to you because it's well, after rook captures on h3, the idea is queen to d4. Now let's see what happens. We're threatening checkmate, and now the only way to stop this and not lose terribly is rook to h7. If you play anything else, then Magnus has queen to g4, and both of your rooks will be attacked. So that's why the rook on h3 isn't so nicely placed. You're going to have to play rook to h7, and now queen to a4. We're going to go after the c6 pawn, and that's it. The g3 pawn completely blocks black's attack, and there is no danger here for white. So that's the kind of the way you have to go. g3 is by far the strongest. But okay, Magnus played king to f1, and now Prague plays rook to h5. Here you could go for queen to h2, but it doesn't really yield anything in particular. So rook to h5 was played. Now the fifth rank will be nicely defended, but that will not be enough. Magnus plays queen to a6, puts more pressure on the c6 pawn. Also, the rook on c8 is now hanging. Rook to f8, and now rook captures on c6. Now Prague will shift everything to the attack, or queen to h2. Now comes rook to c8. When you're stronger, of course, you trade. Bishop to d6, guarding the rook here. Rook captures, bishop captures, and Magnus instantly plays rook to c8. So it's a very, very tricky position, but whatever Prague plays will still lose him the game. So he plays rook to f5. It seems like you are able to put some pressure on the position after queen g3. Maybe you can even threaten checkmate, maybe force Magnus to go back with his pieces. The problem is here white has, or rather Magnus has, a forced checkmate in 15 moves, and it's, well, it's just a beautiful one. So feel free to pause the video and try to spot this mate in 15 while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this absolute brilliancy. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is rook captures on f8. It is exactly what Magnus played. And now just to show you what happens, in the game the rook was captured, which is the best defense. But even if you don't accept the rook, you're still going to get checkmated. Queen to c8 with the threat of rook h8 checkmate. You have to run with the king, rook h8, king to g5. And now we're going to play bishop to g7, a very important move in forcing this checkmate. And after, let's say, queen g3, now Prague can threaten checkmate. Now we just go for bishop h6 check, king to f6, queen to d8 check. We're going to play king e5, and rook to e8 or queen to e7 will be checkmate, as the pawn covers the d4 square. So that's what happens if you don't accept the rook, if you hide to h7. So Prague grabs the rook, but now comes queen to c8 check, king to e7, and bishop to a3. And now, of course, you see that there really are no good squares for the black king. In the game, king f6 was played, and this just runs into a very nasty checkmate, queen to d8, and it was in this position, basically, that Prague resigned the game, because it doesn't matter if you play king to e5 or king to e6, you're still getting checkmated with queen to e7. Also, the same applies for king to e5. Queen to e7 is still checkmate. You cover this, the pawn covers this. There is no square for the king. But continue in the fashion that we advertised the video. What happens if you give up the queen? Then we continue, and it will be a forced checkmate in 15 from that position. So queen d6 can be played, hoping to kind of give up your queen for the bishop, but you don't even get to do that. Queen c7 check now wins the queen for nothing. King f6, we're going to play queen captures on d6 check. King g5, queen to d8 with check. We're going to play king to h6, now queen to h8 with check. King g5, now bishop to e7 with check, f6, and now bishop to d6. And now once those pawns start marching forward, there is no saving that king, and there really is no useful move here for black. Whatever you play, we're going to play f4 check, and now you're going to have to start giving up material. The king has nowhere to go. Rook captures. We're going to play e captures with check. King f5, and now queen to e8, and now there really is nowhere for you to go. g4 will just be a spectacular checkmate. Even if you play g5, it doesn't matter. g4 is checkmate because the queen covers the g6 square. So really a fine game, and really a spectacular finish by Magnus after Pragg played this rook to f5 idea. Just rook captures on f8, a forced checkmate in 15, just spectacular. It's not necessarily accurate that Magnus calculated it all the way to the end. Of course, he could have just calculated to the point where he knows that he's going to win the queen, and then something good will happen. But it's nice when things work out. So yeah, although Pragg was unstoppable in the first 3 matches and he was on 100%, in his match against Magnus, he lost all 3 games. And in the interview after the game, they asked Praggnanandhaa if he thinks that Magnus played his best here, and he said that well, he doesn't think that Magnus played his best, but he's even when he doesn't bring his best, it is obviously very, very strong. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Tough for anyone who was hoping for a Pragg win here, but when you face Magnus, this is the most likely outcome, as many have seen. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have any other games that you would like me to cover, feel free to use hashtag suggestion. I would like to thank Kirsten Leemans, Guy LeFleur Scores, DK Benjamin, Mark Galassi, and Fred Eckerman for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world, like this wonderful Oslo Esports Cup that we are having here. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day, and another big congratulations to everyone who spotted that forced mate in 15. See you soon.